Okay, so we just briefly started talking about ecosystems and the lithosphere and everything that the atmosphere, the biosphere, so all the parts of the earth. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper and start looking more specifically at ecosystems. So first of all, we need to understand what an ecosystem is. And when we talk about ecosystems, we are talking about all of the living organisms. So basically everything that share within a region, they interact with each other. They live near each other. They compete for food. They compete for mates. They compete for space. They compete for prey. Everything. And it also, though, includes their non-living environment. So we're talking about, the trees. So, you could have an ecosystem where you have an ecosystem of a forest where you have birds and foxes and everything all living together in the same area. The ocean is a huge ecosystem, and everything in the ocean interacts with one another, depends on one another, and relies on one another to keep the ecosystem going and to sustain everything. So that's what an ecosystem basically is. It includes us up here, of course, that we fish. You have your populations of fish that are food for other fish. You have the starfish and the corals and stuff. You have the polar bears on top of the ice. You have the birds in the sky. So everything is all connected all together in an ecosystem. So most of the things that I was just talking about were biotic factors. And these are those living factors, these living organisms that interact with each other in an ecosystem. So it can be, these are all living organisms right here. Organisms do not have to mean animals. And that's one of the things that I want you to start thinking about when we talk about these things. It's not just animals. We're talking about the plants that live there as well. Of course, we can be talking about the animals like the frogs that, like to sit on top of an alligator, which I don't know if that's the brightest thing to do, but you never know. But it also includes the remains of organisms, and because that has a huge impact on ecosystems as well, being decomposed and broken down, the nutrients that are in our bodies have to be recycled so that they're available for other animals in the future. It also includes their products and their waste. So, we have these nice little dung beetles that like to roll up balls of poop, and farmers love to have dung beetles around because basically they collect poop, they roll it into a ball, they bury it in the soil, and go back for it later, and they use it to feed off of. But if it's in the soil, it's also decomposing in the soil and adding nutrients to that soil while it's there. So it's a fantastic way to recycle again those nutrients. And you'll hear me talk about recycling nutrients all the time. And I'm not talking about recycling plastics. We're talking about just natural required nutrients for life to exist. So we're talking about the nitrogens and the phosphates and stuff like that we need to continue with life. And so once something dies, its body has to go back to the earth to help supply the plants, which will then in turn supply the plants with nutrients, which then in turn supply the next generation of animals with nutrients. So these are biotic factors, so living factors, organisms, their remains, and their wastes. We also tend to forget, though, that there's abiotic factors as well. And the abiotic factors, well, if biotic is living, then the abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the environment. So these are the physical and chemical components. So it could be the temperature in a certain climate, like in a certain area. It could be the amount of wind. It could be the amount of water and the type of water that surrounds an area. The minerals that's in the soil. Okay, so these are all abiotic conditions, abiotic factors that, depending on what the temperature is, what the wind is, what the water is, and how it is and how much minerals are in the area, that really determines what animals will live there as well. And of course, the air has a huge impact on that, and the air quality and those types of things. So soil is another one. The gases that are in a particular area. So all of these things will have an impact on the living organisms, those biotic factors in an ecosystem. Now, normally, at this point, I would take you outside and we would look at some biotic factors and abiotic factors to see what you can see. We will definitely do this next week, so we will be doing that, and we'll just go outside one day and have a look around and see what we can find. But for now, we have to move on. And so what we're going to look at now are the different organisms that are within an ecosystem. And basically, if you have a group of single species, individuals of a single species, that gives you a population. So for example, if you have, say, 10 deer in an area, that's a population of deer, or it could be 20 geese, or 2,000 ants. That's a population of those. Well, when you have populations of different types of species, like the deer and the ants and the geese all living together in the same area, well, then you have a community. So you have your population of deer, you have a population of birds, you have a population of grass, POP with a little n, that's just short form for population. So if you have deer, and you have birds, and you have grass, then that is all within a community. And then, of course, that takes us one step further. Once you have your community, and then you start looking at its interactions with the abiotic environment. So these are the biotic components. And once you start looking at those biotic components and their interactions, that's what gives you your ecosystem. And that's going to be our huge focus. That's going to be our main focus for this unit, is looking at ecosystems and how they interact and what we're actually doing to them. And this kind of ties in with your project that you're currently working on for your infographic, because we are starting to look at how some of the things that we are producing as humans impact our environment and impact our ecosystems and what that's doing to our world. If you need to pause this to write this down, that's fine. And when you're ready, we can move on. So what I want you to do right now is, let me just back up here for a second. I want you to make a list of 10 things you use every day. Okay, just anything at all. 10 things you use every single day. Like it could be a toothbrush, it could be water, it could be anything. I don't care what it is. Just pause the video right now and everybody make a list of 10 things you use every day. Now that you have your list, okay, I want you to classify everything in your list as biotic, abiotic, or both. So basically what I want you to do, you can either just draw sort of like a Venn diagram, sort of like this. So you could put your abiotic, your biotic, and then the things in the middle that classify as both. So, for example, if you have a CD, okay, or a DVD, the paper liner is actually biotic because the paper liner came from a tree, whereas the plastic case is abiotic. It's something that was man-made or is non-living. So this one would actually go, because you have both these components, a DVD in its case would go into the both categories. So classify your things and you can pause it right now and do that. Okay, so now that we have that done, and just let me get rid of this here. Okay, actually ignore this part, so don't bother with this. Okay, um, so hopefully now you have your Venn diagram like this. You have your biotic factors on one side, you have your abiotic factors on the other, and then you're both in the middle. And we will come back to this definitely. But the main thing that I want you to get from this is the fact that, we don't really think about the products that we use every single day, where they come from, and if they actually come from living things or non-living things, or sometimes they come from both. So the idea is different ecosystems do have different abiotic and biotic features that make them very distinct. So, for example, if we look at a coniferous forest versus a desert, very different ecosystems. So in a coniferous forest, of course, if we think about biotic factors, we would have trees and conifers, of course, so spruce trees and fir trees. You would have fern and some grass and shrubs. You would have animals like wolves or coyotes and fox, and you could have all different types of birds and squirrels. If you think about, so those are all the biotic parts, but what about the abiotic parts? If you think about the abiotic parts, you have usually a cool environment and some rain, as opposed to in a desert where your abiotic conditions are going to be not as much rain, it's going to be much hotter, so the temperature is going to be very different. So these are the things that I'm going to want you to start thinking about and comparing and looking at the differences. And if you consider the abiotic conditions of the desert and the abiotic conditions of the forest, it kind of makes sense that the animals and plants that live in each place is adapted to those conditions. A fox wouldn't do overly well in a desert as it does in a forest. And you have, of course, desert animals that live in the desert and need the hot temperatures and those sorts of things that wouldn't do so well in the forest. So what I want you to do now, again, take a minute, pause this video right here and brainstorm some of the characteristic abiotic and biotic features of these very different ones. So what is typical for a coniferous forest? What is typical for a desert? Both biotic and abiotic. So brainstorm, like I said, some of these things, and you can pause the video now, and when you're done coming up with these characteristics, come back and continue. So if we look at these biotic and abiotic influences, there is competition between them, and I've talked about this and alluded to this. So if we look at foxes and coyotes, for example, they feed on common prey. So they, depending on how much prey is available, they have to compete for this. Humans and insects actually compete for the same crop plants, and we have a lot of problems, of course, with insects eating our plants. Sorry. So you will have competition within a species. These two would be competing for the same mate. And same idea, you have these guys competing as well. And this is within a species, but then you also have competition between different species, like in that situation with the foxes and the coyotes. Very different species, and they're competing for the same stuff as well. A lot of times there are times when plants and animals or animals and animals will actually work together, and we call this mutualism. And this is where plants provide nutrients for a certain bacteria, and the bacteria provide nitrogen to the plant. So one is able to provide something for the other one, and vice versa. And there's all kinds of mutualistic relationships. So I don't know exactly, this shrimp probably eats things off of the scales of this fish, and this fish would then be sort of like transportation, a free ride for the shrimp to get around. And of course, we're all aware of how bees collect the nectar from flowers for food, and then as well, the flowers then get their pollen transferred from flower to flower for reproduction. So these are mutualistic types of relationships that animals and plants use and benefit each other. Then there's other ones that aren't so great. You have parasites, and this is like, you have one organism taking full advantage of another one. Tapeworms, for example, live in cats and dogs and humans, and if you get a tapeworm in your intestine, it basically sucks all your nutrients out. We have things like ticks that burrow into the skin of dogs and humans. And they just basically feed off of their blood. You have things like leeches that will attach to fish and suck their nutrients out. And then, of course, tapeworms, these lovely things that basically get passed into animals that we eat. And then if it's not cooked well, these larvae can actually, if we eat these things that's not well cooked, goes into our body, and these tapeworms go in there, and they basically use their mouth parts to attach to your intestines, and they just hang on there for a free ride and absorb all of your nutrients. So this is what a tapeworm would look like, and these are parasites. So they take advantage. The host, the human in this case, does not. There's no advantage for the host to have a parasite. So it's not mutualism. It's not where both are benefiting at all. And then last bit, we have abiotic factors: temperature, light, soil, all of these things. Like I said, they can influence the ability of organisms to live in a certain area. There are different ranges that organisms can withstand. And for example, you could be looking at temperature, and this is the optimum range. They can withstand here and here, but then after that, on each side, they can no longer survive. So this could be anything from temperature ranges, so below certain temperatures or above certain temperatures, you cannot survive. And you have these ranges. It could be pH level of soil. It could be amount of water. So basically, there's different ranges that species can survive. Sorry, that's my dog. So the whole idea, no matter where you live, what ecosystem, what biotic factors, abiotic factors are around, the whole idea is that we need to create sustainable ecosystems. So we have to have ecosystems where we have these constant characteristics that allow us to survive in an area. And this is what this unit is about. It's about sustainable ecosystems and looking at the changes to the abiotic and biotic factors and how they actually can disrupt an ecosystem. And if it's disrupt beyond those ranges, those tolerance ranges, then it can be disastrous. We are the ones responsible for a lot of these changes, and this is what we will be exploring throughout, like I said, this unit. We are also affected by different biotic and abiotic features. Smog, and you don't have to write this down specifically, but smog affects our breathing. Of course, low winter light levels. So in places like Canada, where we have low amounts of light in the winter, it can cause disorders like SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder, which people get depressed and tired, and because they're not getting enough of the vitamin D from the sun. Even economically, All of these things depend on the abiotic and biotic feature. So our forestry and our mining and our tourism and all of these components of life as we know it are affected by what characteristics we have. The fishery, for example, collapsed on the East Coast, and that has a huge impact on the people living there, and all these other things. So that's basically the end of this lesson, and we'll start looking in more detail at different things once I return. Tomorrow we'll look at food webs, and I have a little activity for you, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun with that. Have a great day. See you soon.